Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for February's ECLI webinar. If you are not familiar with ECLI, we are the Early Career Librarians Initiative associated with the South Central chapter of the Medical Library Association. My name is Tracy Ashby, and I am a current member. We partnered with NNLM Region 3 to launch this webinar series on topics that are useful to LIS students and early career librarians. Our next session will be in April, so watch out for our webpage for more information. Feel free to drop any questions into the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end. We are so pleased to welcome this month's speakers, Adela Justice and Tara Malone. Adela V. Justice is a senior librarian at the UT MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, and works in the Patient Education Consumer Health Library, the Learning Center. She has been a librarian for almost 30 years and has spent almost 25 of those in the medical libraries. She served on the board of the Medical Library Association from 2020 to 2023 and is also very active in her MLA chapter, the South Central chapter. She is a distinguished member of the Academy of Health Information Professionals. She loves presenting and publishing as it fulfills her need for a creative outlet. So far, her output includes 29 posters, 10 articles in peer-reviewed publications, several conference paper presentations and webinars, and numerous newsletter articles. She also serves her need for creativity by being a professional part-time bass player and can be found on social media under the hashtag #BassPlayAndLibrarian. Tara Malone is the Associate Professor of Health Sciences Library and Information Management at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center and head of Serials of Medicine in the Robert M. Byrd Library. She is the current chair of the research committee for the South Central chapter of the Medical Library Association and recently served as jury chair for the Medical Library Association's Research Training Institute. Together with her colleagues, she has performed research and authored publications on such topics as research impact metrics, consumer health information outreach, and the e-health literacy of older adults. In today's webinar, our speakers will be giving a presentation on integrating research, publishing, and presenting into your career. Thank you so much to our guests for being here today, and I'm going to go ahead and turn everything over to Tara to get us started.
Snag screen, I think. Okay, can everybody see the fancy presentation version of the screen? Okay,
yes, you're good.
Okay, good deal. So thank you, Tracy, for the introduction. I am all of those things that Tracy said I was, to the best of my knowledge still. One thing that has recently changed, I don't know if it's crucial for anybody to know, is that we have recently been rebranded as the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences. And center is no longer part of our thing or what we do. So, or University of Oklahoma High School is another thing that I have heard, but I don't think that's what that's supposed to represent it. So you may see a little bit of both representations from our organization for a while. So I am here. If you guys signed up for this, you realize hopefully that you signed up for a presentation with 3 different learning objectives. And I am here to accompany you on your journey for the first 2. So I appreciate being invited by the ECLI and by NNLM Region 2. I'm going to say thank you in advance. I already said this in kind of the pre-coffee meeting Zoom room before this, that I will probably at some point give some sort of desperate shout out to one of my colleagues that's in the quote unquote room, of which I have several, to say, hey, what does that mean? Or what did I mean when I just said that? Or can somebody answer that? And they didn't know I was going to do that until now, but I'm guaranteeing you that they are not surprised. So we're going to talk about, before Adela takes over, the learning objectives 1 and 2, but there have been some slight modifications that were ad hoc and I did not run by literally anybody. And particularly that comes to this first learning objective. And this happened because initially I was saying, okay, identify strategies for beginning the research process, which seems a little broad in my experience. And because the more I reflected on, why am I here? I can only really talk about the things that I have been through and seen. The thing that I have seen, I think, the most and experienced the most myself as a practitioner is this struggle for practitioners to incorporate research into what they do every day. Because it's really, for those of us that do practice full time, it's not really divisible. And so I wanted to specify more than strategies, hopefully discuss some of the practical tips, either that I have learned or experienced or that have been shared with me as far as getting started with the research process and integrating that into what you do the day to day. And then getting into the super shifty stuff, which is the very dynamic and very quick and dirty overview of the academic publishing situation or situations at the moment, kind of a highlights overview. It is really complicated, and I don't know if it's any comfort, but I am a really big nerd about it too. And so I will be taking you somewhere along that area that will hopefully be helpful. And I'm so used to stopping and asking for questions because I like to be interrupted with questions. Because of the format of how we have things laid out, I just wanted to let everybody know you will have time for questions after I'm done and Adela's done speaking. There will be a substantial time for Q&A for both of us. So don't freak out. I can't see your questions right now, even if you showed them to me, because it's too much for me to manage, but you will be heard. Hopefully you will have questions. And so I'm only going over because we have such a short amount of time, of course, for each of us. And I want to be respectful of Adela's time because I could expound upon this stuff, indefinitely. But there are lots of different versions of a research, timeline, or a research life cycle, or a publication cycle. Really, in any journal, in any field, you would find multiple versions of each of these things. And so this one is just, again, based on what I have experienced most of the time. Now, who you are as an investigator, the type of research that you do, the type of requirements for your institution will all dictate how much does your timeline or your cycle, whatever you want to call it, follow these steps as far as, the process from starting your research all the way to presentation and publication. This is what mine looked like. And I think a lot of them have a lot in common. We all need to know what are the concepts of our study design. What do we want to learn? What logistics do we need to get in place as far as funding, as far as, co-authors, what kind of data do we want to collect? Writing is always where I have seen people, and I myself really get hung up in this process, which is part of that research to presentation timeline, and it's a really important one. Obviously, because we do want to be publishing manuscripts and sharing our research. That's typically how in our field and many fields that we do that. But not only because of the actual act of writing is so horrible, it's also just we're entering into this academic publishing world that, again, is very dynamic and very confusing if you're not navigating it on a regular basis. So hopefully I will have some things that will help with both of those things, or they may help with neither, but that's my goal. And then more toward the end of this timeline is where I envision what Adela is going to be sharing with you, will be picking up, which is talking about making those submissions, making those presentations at conferences, combating things like imposter syndrome, which I do think some librarians really do suffer from because they're not necessarily considered quote unquote researchers. And then I think some of us could maybe suffer from it more. And so from both perceptions, I think it's a good topic for us to talk about. But just to stress again that this is based on my experience only. My experience is as someone who is a practitioner and a faculty member, but I am not a faculty member with protected research time, and many of us are not, and that dictates a lot about how can we incorporate research practically into what we do day to day. I'm also struggling a little bit because, as anybody who works with me or has taught with me knows, is that I usually use when I'm out of breath or need a drink, which is all the time, hey, anybody have any questions excuse while I take a drink, and I don't get to do that this time, so I am stretching my boundaries. And so what you have before you is a lot of text, and that's not an accident. That's because I have a very short amount of time, but also because as cute as presentations are of memes, they may not be helpful if someone's downloading these slides, which have been made available without any sort of context or explanation. And so there is quite a bit of information on this slide. I hope that it's all relevant. And so during my time as in a couple of positions, so one was as chair of the evidence-based research and evidence-based research and practice curriculum committee for the Medical Library Association, and then also chair as of the Research Training Institute as well. And then, of course, from my own experience trying to do research as a practitioner, I felt like there were some common themes that came into being. And the first of those is really, really big one. I see it in conferences. I had to learn it myself. It is ongoing, and that's this idea that we need to familiarize ourselves with what really is or really isn't research. And are there always hardcore definitions of what is or isn't? No. Or do they vary within different disciplines? Yes. But there are some very general ideas that we can get around before we say that we're about to do research and go to the effort of developing a research question, submitting an abstract or a proposal, and then kind of getting kicked back and going, well, this isn't research. So, and I think it's easy to do when you're inexperienced. And I also think it's easy to do when you are a practitioner for a living, because one of the things that we get told quite often in many fields is that research has to be generalizable. Well, that's not realistic for a lot of fields. It's a great goal. The alternative that we consider in fields like ours a lot of the time is if it's not generalizable to the world at large, is it contributing to or is it building upon research that has been done? That means it's research often. Now, on the flip side, a lot of times what I see are program or environmental evaluation that are presented as research. So for example, you do a survey on whether or not people really like those new footstools in your library. That's not research unless you are using things like controlled environments to compare things in place. It's not that this is useless knowledge, but it's not what's typically considered, research in the traditional sense of that. Something else I think that is a mistake that seems to be made often, and I certainly made it when I started out, which is this idea that quantitative statistics being present make this research. So you can have quantitative statistics about those footstools and whether or not people like them. It tells us nothing. So there again, I'll talk a little bit more about quantitative statistics and their role in research, but just to keep in mind, we need to start at the beginning, which is familiarizing ourselves with like, okay, is what I want to do even considered research? And the next big step I had to struggle with, and that I saw many people struggle with, I think certainly during proposals for the Research Training Institute, but I also saw some really great examples of people doing this in their Research Training Institute proposals, which is integrating your research with what you do day to day. So even for those of us, as it says here, who are faculty, we almost never get time for protected research. If you do, that's awesome. Hang on to it. I definitely do not, but I still need to do research. I still like to do research. I still think it's important. So how do I, merge that with what I have to do every day as a very busy practitioner? And so I think a lot of it is viewing what you do just from a different lens, which is really hard when you're buried in it. But can you look at what you're doing through a different lens and think, is something missing from this process? Is that something that would interest other people or help other people or colleagues if I share that information? Those are kinds of questions that you can ask that are just examples. But I did give an example here of something that my colleagues and I did, is that we had an outreach grant from the regional office. I think it was no, this is when we were asked by public libraries to provide classes regarding internet skills and information health seeking skills on the internet to older adults. And while we did that, we also worked with them on a study that assessed their e-health literacy, using tools that were published in the literature for people of their age group. And we're able to learn some really interesting things that helped our next stages. We're able to publish from that and present from that. And so that's just an example. Again, it may not fit what you have had to do, but or what's available to you, but it's an example of what in our situation we were able to do as far as marrying those two things together. And so I feel like I'm going through really fast but I also feel like if I don't, I'm going to run out of time. So many apologies. Another thing I think that I have struggled very much with, and so I don't want to, again, take myself out of any of these things. I don't want to be the person that says, you should, I'm the expert, I'm the expert, I'm the expert. I am the experiencer. As far as having done it myself, as far as having seen other people do it. Anything that involves writing is challenging for people. If people say that they're not challenged by writing, I am concerned about their writing, because I was a professional writer for many, many years, full-time and freelance, and I am constantly concerned about my writing. Now, one of the most important things where that comes to bear isn't even later in the manuscript that would come, or your abstract for your submission. It really comes from the very starting point of writing your research question. And so I'm sure all of us took a class either in high school or during our graduate studies on the proper ways to write a research question. And these can apply in various situations. I have not found any sort of rigorous formula for writing a research question that really fits what I have all the time, but some of them do have some things in common. So this idea that the question needs to be solvable or measurable, like it can't be too open-ended. It has to actually be able to be answered. Preferably, is it novel, which is what a lot of people put emphasis on, or sometimes more practically, does it build upon established research and add to a body of knowledge in our field? That is just as valuable when it comes to writing a research question. But it's important to also have some self-reflection when you're writing a research question. So are you writing a question that's really a yes/no question? Are you writing something that's really a statement of your opinion? Does your research question answer itself, as you were reading it through? Is it about your fancy library footstools? You should stop. You should pump the brakes and take a look at the structure of your research question, because this seems very nitpicky, but if a well-written research question, and I say written because all of this idea of doing novel studies and everything else is very important to the overall concept. The actual writing of the research question provides you with a structure that you will be able to follow throughout your study, ideally. Now, that being said, there are acronyms all over the place of checkpoints through your research questions, including one that we're very familiar with is PICO. There's FINER. And all of these may help, but really the bones of this, in my experience, are in the writing of the question, which unfortunately makes it the hardest part, but also perhaps the most productive once it's done. Any questions? I'll be taking questions in like 30 minutes. No questions for now. So this idea of don't force a fit, for me, it kind of ties back into this dazzling quality of quantitative research. And that's not to dismiss quantitative research, because obviously It's very valuable. It's very important, but it's not the only kind of research that is valuable and important. And I think depending on the kind of research you do, you might have and espouse and spread that opinion. But, above I said that the presence of quantitative statistics and data alone, it doesn't make what you've done about our footstools research, right? The converse is true. If you're using a different type of statistics, if you're using qualitative methods, if you're using mixed methods, then it does not mean that you're not having research just because those quantitative aspects are absent. And so that's just something to keep in mind when it comes to soliciting opinions or doing research on research or anything of that above. We're going to get a lot of perspectives from a lot of different fields that may not tell you, hey, we're perspectives from different fields that may or may not be applicable to yours. So that's something just to keep in mind when you're doing your research about research. And so the last thing, practical tip again, that I would emphasize when it comes to actually integrating that research into what you do day to day is to work with your colleagues. Your colleagues are going to improve your ideas for research. Your colleagues are going to improve your writing. Your colleagues ideally are going to question you without being jerks about ways and different perspectives that you might not normally catch on to. There's a reason that team science is not only kind of a trend, in some fields, it's actually a requirement. And so really consider other perspectives other than your own if they are available to you. Collaborate with internal colleagues or find external colleagues that can fill gaps in expertise that you may not have. All of this will contribute to, I think, the richness of whatever you're developing. And something to touch on too is this idea is if you are working with a team to work on a project and to write a manuscript, a lot of times there will come a point in time where the elephant in the room is this idea of the first author construct, with which I assume that we are all familiar. But it's this idea in many disciplines, not all, that the first author, sometimes it's the last author, is the person who did the bulk of the work, deserves the bulk of the credit. And we are learning more and more that, especially as team science has caught hold, that is not always an accurate representation or a fair allocation of credit for our colleagues that help us or that are equal members of a team accomplishing a research study. And so more and more you do see messages in journals, even like Science, where there are notes that say things like all of these, these contributors had equal contribution to this project or something along more eloquent, but along those lines, basically saying we're all the same. Our contributions are all the same. Like our names may be in this order for whatever reason, but really this credit is shared. Now, the flip side, when I say if realistic, is that your institution, especially if you're in a traditional university institution, may require that you have a certain number of first author publications, because that is still very entrenched. And I'm not saying it's inappropriate in all situations, but some fields and some institutions, you have a little bit more freedom to take that approach, like that message that was in Science Magazine, and to share credit in a different way, or to try and make sure that everybody gets appropriate credit, not kind of based on, an order of names that may or may not be accurate. And so that's what I mean by the first author, model potentially being problematic, and just to examine it. I'm not saying get rid of it, but examine it if it is within the feasibility to do so. Without questions, I go too long and have an allergy attack. Okay, did that mute while I was hacking like somebody 3 times my age? I can't see anybody's answers, so I'm gonna say yes. So I keep going back to this idea of writing, and that definitely is influenced by the fact again that I was a full-time writer of all sorts of fun for about 7 years. And so that's everything from magazine articles, kind of like harder journalism, to restaurant reviews, to writing speeches and talking points for university administration, to news releases, to writing NIH grants, to writing, abstracts and posters. And so during that time, I learned a couple of things. And one was that I don't want to be a writer anymore. And so I went to become a librarian. And then the second thing I learned is that becoming a librarian means that I write just as much, just in different ways. And so between kind of a past in writing and a current, time in the serials world and publishing world quite a bit, I think this is the place where so many people struggle. I think that if you're not struggling, maybe you should be, or maybe we should all be really jealous and you should be the one giving this presentation for sure. But for those of you that have not had the experience yet of doing a project or some sort of evaluation, doesn't have to be a research project, could be a program, presentation or something of that sort. But when you do go to look to publish, there are so many different ways to assess what journals that you want to publish in. What's really important, I think, is to develop a short list of the journals that you feel your work would appear. And I say journals, we know there's more than one type of medium, but we're going to go with journals for now. It's really important that you identify the ones you want to publish in most, and then start with the one that you prioritized as your top and write toward that journal. And that's because journals have so many different requirements on structure, on what types of articles that they will even accept, and their acceptance rates are all extremely different. And so it's not unusual to be rejected and then move on to the next journal in your list. It's very, very normal. I mean, some of us, yes, we're accepted, we've had these accepted first try. Others of us, you have to kind of shop it around, and that's very normal as well. The one thing I would caution is not to make multiple submissions at a time, because no journal wants to be the third journal to break this breaking science news. And it's really not well received to do that. But do start to focus on the ones that you want and write toward those. Don't pick those journals after you write, or you may be doing a lot of rewriting. And speaking of rewriting, it is so important to get anything down on paper. I have never known someone who sat down to write their article and just wrote their article. Never. I've never done it. More often, what I encounter are people who sit down to write their article are extremely frustrated because they're trying to write their article. And the key, I think, for me and what I've seen help other people is get something down on paper. And it really literally doesn't matter what, and I cannot mean that more literally. So if your toddler is tapping Morse code, put it on the paper. You have now written your first draft. Whatever your dog is drawing in the dirt to let you know it's hungry, it's pictures, put that in your first draft. Half of my first draft is nothing but dots and dashes and blanks and notes to myself. Well, that doesn't sound good. You need to fix this. It literally within the sentences. And then you have to step away and you have to do whatever your heart wants for a while. And then you have to come back, and then you sit down and you look at this manuscript of gibberish, and all of a sudden you can start writing, because really rewriting is where that happens. And so don't try and get anything good. Don't even try and get anything decipherable necessarily down the first time. If you get anything down, you've done the hardest part. Same as with other recommendations I've made. I think colleagues and co-authors can really improve your work, whether it's through being co-authors, whether it's through editing. Again, if this is the course you choose to take, take a look at that first author model, see if it's something that you can consider alternatives through. And then finally, a caveat word of advice. When I was first getting responses from reviewers, and I was getting some pretty weird comments back sometimes, or I was getting comments where I was like, I said that, didn't I say that? I said that. And I've learned that this is really common. But I felt really pressured because I was like, what if I don't do what these reviewers are telling me to do? My work's not going to get accepted. But that's not the case a lot of the time. And a lot of the time you're going to get reviewers who don't have context for your work, even if they're adjacent or in your field. You're going to get reviewers who just flat out didn't have time to read, things as closely as maybe they should. And what I've learned is that do not be afraid to push back politely and with reason, explain yourself thoroughly to reviewers to be like why you chose not to accept something that they told you they thought you should do. Now, I say that, and here I put this caveat, don't just blow them off either. Don't just be like, you don't know what you're talking about. Hopefully the whole point of peer review is that they do. But just if you're a new writer, don't feel obligated to do everything they say without some consideration. So I don't know. How much time do I have left? Someone should say that.
I think about another 5 minutes. I think we had about 30 minutes for you and 30 minutes for Adele, and then 30 minutes for questions.
So I've got about 5 minutes. Is that right?
Yeah, I think about
Okay.
about 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, we can make that happen. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm respectful of other people's time. So when it comes to publishing, depending on what you do with your day-to-day, you may have more exposure than others to what you're looking at here. But it affects all of us that are trying to publish. And it also very much all affects those of us who, like me, are in serials and are helping either people to publish or, negotiating with publishers, etc. All of this is a huge impact on all of us. And so there are several types of open access, which is what we hear about a lot. And so, gold open access is usually, hey, we'll make this available totally for free immediately. Pay us about $2,000 to $4,000 per article for article processing charges or APCs to do that, although not all do. The first article that I published was in an open access journal that did not charge APCs, but many gold open access do. And then there's this idea of green open access, which often involves, for example, people almost self-archiving or publishing in repositories or publishing to their websites. It's usually free. It often is a way to meet the open access mandates through institutions such as the NIH and everything, but not always. There's, of course, the closed access traditional model, which is what we're used to. People subscribe and pay to receive that content. Often, not always, there's no article processing charge for an author to publish there. And then there's hybrid open access, which is very, very common in my experience lately of working with publishers, which is the fact that some of a publisher's or a journal's content is completely open access, but for, of course, articles, processing charges that authors pay. Some other articles in that journal are closed access, but that traditional model, meaning they get published there, but authors do not pay article processing charges, and those articles are behind a paywall. And so that has seemed quite common with a lot of the bigger publishers that we are working with more and more. It is been kind of criticized because some people view it, depending on the practices of the publisher, as double dipping. So you're charging authors to publish in there quite a bit of money, and then also publishing subscribers to pay for the journal. And so some institutions are coming out and saying this doesn't count to meet our mandates, et cetera. But know that A, it is a very common model all the same. And B, if you want to publish in a hybrid open access journal and you cannot or do not want to make the large, APCs it would take to publish open access, that doesn't cut the journal off for you. You still have the option to publish in a traditional closed access behind a paywall manner without paying APCs. So just keep that in mind that there are definitely pros and cons of all of these models, but you do have choices. This last part about transformative agreements is on here for a couple of reasons. And one of them, as I explained to a colleague last night, is because I needed a fifth star to make this work, but also because this is coming up more and more. And this is something that we're dealing with, those of us who deal with contracts and negotiations with publishers, is this these agreements, and they take many shapes and forms, and they're all quite new, in which the library or institution pays the publisher either a flat fee or increased subscription rates to do, quote, read and publish. But the takeaway is that in exchange, the institution's authors that want to publish in that journal or with that publisher can either have a discount on APCs if they're publishing open access or have those APCs completely waived. And so this is a very new and emerging model, but it's one to be aware of if you want to investigate what options your institution has for supporting either you or your users financially. Are they engaged in any of these? Really, time's going to have to bear out how these work out, but it is a fairly new development. But something I will say is that if you are going to apply for funding, please check that funder's open access mandates and what types of journals and what types of publication or archiving meet those requirements, because that will have potentially a financial impact on you when you're publishing down the road. Also, some people are building, I know some of these costs into their grant applications. And so there's all sorts of considerations that come along with these. And it's worth investigating pretty early in your research to publication journey. Okay, this is the last one before the goodbye for now. I had to do this slide because it was too fun. The email came when I was working on this, and something I think that is a danger, it has been a danger for quite a while for all of us, is this idea of predatory publishers. It's something that our faculty are constantly, worried about. We're constantly trying to help them determine, okay, is this publisher or are they not considered predatory according to their practices, or are they just, new? And like so much with AI too, it seems like the solicitations from these are getting better and better at masquerading as legitimate. This is not one of those. So this journal is not good at being or even remotely appearing legit. And so what I did is I took a few cues from the email that I got from them. And then I also went into their website, into the NLM catalog, et cetera, to do some more investigation. And so we have, this idea that there's a kind of a gibberish subject line. They don't know who I am because they don't know my academic title. They don't know that I'm not a biostatistician, so they're still offering me a place on their board. There's this idea that it's really urgent, like we know you're going to support us by February 20th. Like I said, like their kids are getting held hostage until I give them a mini review and support them and be there for them. All of this language is erroneous and weird. And then if you go to, but again, some journals are weird. One of the things that always tips me off when I get emails like these is this idea of, hey, here's our journal impact factor. And the first thing that I always do, if I see one of these journals that does claim to have a journal impact factor, it may be true, but I will go to journal citation reports and see, hey, is this journal indexed here? Because if a journal is not indexed in JCR, it does not have a journal impact factor, which is the case with this journal. They do not have one. Their website was full of very strange indexing claims. For example, they had this whole list up here on the top right of how they're indexed in Scribd, which I think is an audio book service, maybe. And, ORCID is an initiative that addresses things like author name disambiguation. These are not areas in which I would consider literature typically being indexed. And then on their website, they also had things like their PubMed indexed articles. But if you follow the links out and you look at the journal in the NLM catalog, just by making a couple of clicks, they specifically say this is not indexed in Medline. And if it's here, it's only because someone, either the author or publisher, deposited a manuscript into PubMed Central. It is not indexed. That's very misleading. But my favorite is the kind of hyperbolic language that you'll sometimes see. That's just a clue to investigate. It's not saying, oh, they're definitely bad. In this case, I think not great. But to say, that they are established with the aim of spreading quality scientific information to the research community throughout the universe. And I, of course, had to click on the and more because I already have my popcorn out. And I don't want to give you guys their names, but there are these publishers everywhere. And so they particularly target sometimes, I think, new researchers and new publishers because they either are under extensive pressure to publish or they simply have not had enough exposure to identify just how shady an agreement with this would be. And so I just wanted to give you guys, because it came up literally in my inbox as I was working on this, an example of emails that I get literally every day that are just, I think, examples of what to be on the lookout for, not just for ourselves, but also for those people that we help. Okay, and so again, there'll be time for questions if you've been asking them. I know that they're in the chat. There's Adela is coming up with who she has been introduced already, but she will be talking about this next step. So kind of beyond publication or tandem with publication, which is this idea of doing submissions and presenting and dealing with imposter syndrome. And so that's all learning objective 3 here. But I do want to urge you to consider and looking at, not necessarily applying for it, depends on what is practical for you, but the Medical Library Institute's Research Training Institute. In my experience from being on that jury and from chairing that jury, there are some great opportunities there to develop a project that really connects your research to your practice, which is not something all sorts of grants or applications allow you to do. Some of the best proposals I saw did exactly that thing. Also, if you will look at, not to just completely market everybody, but if you'll look at the Region 3 class catalog, there's such a diversity of topics there. If you were looking for inspiration for research, or if you were looking at that catalog and you say, hey, I do that all the time, is there a way to transition that into research? I think that might provide for some people some inspiration if you're looking for ideas. But I appreciate your guys' time, and I am going to stop sharing, and I am going to now let Adela share her journey for learning objective 3. I stopped sharing, right?
Think so. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Tara. I love presenting with experts. So yes, I'm going to pick up. This is part 2, submission to presentation, as Tara mentioned. And she covered the first 2 learning objectives, and I will pick up where she left off and get into how to submit and present your amazing research. I have a bit of an agenda here. Hopefully when we're done, you'll understand kind of the process, how to submit an abstract proposal to a conference, or and I'll touch on journals as well. I'm going to cover some how to do some presentation skills, get some presentation skills for your academic conferences. And I'm also going to include some strategies for paper presentation versus poster. And I can't help myself. I got to get into design best practices. And then hopefully we'll also identify and have a fundamental understanding of applying for research or travel reimbursement funding opportunities. Conferences and meetings are not cheap, y'all. And then finally, I'll get into how to develop skills to recognize and overcome that evil imposter syndrome. Okay, so first we're going to discuss submitting your abstract. Now, one of the first things you want to try to decide on is format. And every conference website should have an FAQ on submissions. This is the MLA 24 example. So, you know, you need to decide, are you going to submit your project as a paper, poster, or even a lightning talk? And keep in mind that different due dates for different formats could apply, so pay attention to that. And then I'm so glad that Tara touched on this, on her what is research? What can we constitute as research? So this is an example of what your research might look like if it's a research project. Usually you have things like objectives, methods, results, conclusions. But if you want to present maybe on a program that you've done in your library, or something not so, you know, research oriented as Tara described, your abstract is probably going to have, you know, background, description, conclusion. But whatever you do, make sure that you pay attention to the word count in their instructions and the deadlines, because they are very serious about those word counts and deadlines, although sometimes deadlines can be extended. SCCMLA, we usually do extend our submission deadlines at least once. Now, journal articles, similarly, you must follow their instructions. Every journal has, should have, I believe they all do have, author instruction web pages. And so these are a couple of examples here. They have very precise instructions on how to assign keywords to your article in your abstract, how to submit. Sometimes they want you to email the paper. Sometimes you have to upload it to their complicated portal system. And also they have submission deadlines that they're very serious about. They really get into detail on how to do your images, your tables, your citations, your font size, paragraph spacing, etc. So follow their instructions. Now, in terms of the deadlines, it does depend on how often the journal is published. Keep in mind, you know, Tara had that great timeline of, you know, writing to all that. It takes months, y'all, from submission to publication. My latest article that we submitted, we started writing it in June. We submitted it in December. I believe it would be published in April. I've sort of forgotten all about it, but I'll be happily surprised when I get the notice that it's been published. Keep in mind that their deadline will determine which upcoming issue your article will be published in. So for paper presentations, like at a conference, I just want to get into some design. We're librarians, we're not graphic designers, but I think we can always do better. I just Googled a couple of good sites here, you know, Microsoft PowerPoint mistakes to avoid, 24slides.com, bad PowerPoint mistakes. And you can Google to find tons and tons of websites on this topic. Now, if you have LinkedIn Learning, I do through my institution. If you don't have it LinkedIn Learning through your institution, you should have it through your public library, but they have a great class. I had to market it here, PowerPoint 8 Easy Ways. And this class actually made me redo this PowerPoint and tweak it to make it a little better. So these are some great resources. And like I said, you can Google on your own. Okay, so the first one, beware the text-filled screens. I have an example here. Looks like they did bullet points, but it's still too much text. So your audience, be they in person or be they at home on their laptop, will probably do this if you have too much text. You can actually watch videos on how to avoid death by PowerPoint. Those are really fun to watch. Sometimes they even show a bad PowerPoint slide and then they'll show how they made it better, and that's very inspiring. Just some more common things about your PowerPoints. So PowerPoint has, all kinds of colors and bells and whistles and stuff. You can probably, if you haven't already, done some research on the color wheel to find out which colors go best together. PowerPoint has over 150 animations. If you use Canva, they have just as many, if not more, probably more. And then I also have an example here about minimalism. There's an example of a slide that was just too boring, and then they made it so much more attractive. If you would like to put some of your pet peeves about PowerPoint presentations in the chat, I would love to see them. I'm sure we all have very similar ones. And then the last thing I want to say is just to keep it moving. Keep it moving, y'all. I saw one standard that suggested a minute per slide. I mean, depending on what you're presenting. 2 minutes, okay, I'm Generation X, and like I don't even have as bad of an attention span as the younger generations, and even my attention is like, not good. Librarians, we're really, really bad with signage. We're way too wordy. So think billboards. I love the billboards, or even band flyers that you see tacked up in clubs. You can read this billboard while speeding past at 65 miles an hour, and look at how all the information is there and you got it. So I like to think of billboards when I'm, doing my slides. Okay, so now we're going to get into paper presentation skills for paper presentations and lightning talks. Ooh, I did one animation. Yeah, just one. So just as a reminder, paper presentations are longer. They're like, 10 to 20 minutes at a conference with some time built in for questions. Lightning talks are super short, usually about 5 minutes. Sometimes they'll let you have 1 to 3 slides. Sometimes they don't let you have any slides. I had to do ones where we weren't allowed slides, and that was kind of brutal. I think 1 slide, like they should just let us have at least 1. You can watch TED Talks. TED Talks are great because those speakers have trained themselves to be so natural up on that stage. There's even TED Talks on how to give good presentations. So I encourage you to look into those. There's also even books on how to give great presentations. But the main thing that I want to tell you to do, is practice and rehearse your presentation. Say the words at least, once or twice or thrice. Try not to sound like you're reading a script. I have the Saturday Night Live news guys here because if you watch Saturday Night Live, including the skits, they're reading cue cards, but you can't really tell. I mean, obviously they're pros and everything, but you don't have to, read your script so stilted, and it helps if you practice by saying the words. So do at least 1 through and make sure you time it if they've given you a time limit. Some people like to record and playback. I'm not that hardcore, but it is an option and it'll make you better. I have this TED Talk here. This guy says that presentations are not about giving information. They're about transformation. So this is a really interesting TED Talk that I got. I mean, librarians can do both. We can give information and we can transform. But this was a really good one that I recommend you watch. Now we're going to get into poster presentations, some more design best practices. What I want to say is I have this nice friendly girl here. If I could give you one bit of advice about your posters is get a poster buddy. Now this is a friend who, maybe another librarian, but someone that when you're done with your poster, you can send them the PDF and say, okay, tell me, does it make sense? My poster buddy lives across the country. I found her through Twitter. And so she has no context for my poster. So if she looks at my poster and it makes sense to her, then I've done a great job. But sometimes she does send back questions like, hey, have you thought about this? Or what does that mean? Or maybe put this here. And she always makes my posters so much better. They can also spot the typos, and I guarantee your poster has typos. I see them all the time. But if you don't have a poster buddy, you can even post in Reddit/design. There's a Reddit/design channel, and I've seen people post there, and that's the internet, so be careful. But you can do that too, and you'll get some good feedback. Okay, so when you do your poster, the typical sections are going to be usually like some kind of intro, maybe methodology, results, conclusion. Don't put an abstract ever. Y'all, your poster is the abstract. Okay, we don't need abstract. Use lots of bullets, use block text, use color thoughtfully, use color containers. I like to cut my text down to bullet points, and then I go back and I cut it some more. I'm hardcore with the text on posters. the better poster. We've all heard about this better poster trend a few years back. There's the famous YouTube that I'm sure many of us have watched. Do you want to use better poster? I mean, consider it. And that's a good segue to my examples. These are 3 of my posters that I have done recently. So the first one was about my the grief collection we have here in my library, and I just kind of designed it myself. I sprinkled some of the book covers throughout, very as little text as I could get on there. I make my posters scream. I cut them so hard. So my middle poster, I did use better poster. I have used better poster on maybe 4 of my posters or so. So that's my example. And then the third poster there, it was based on a roundtable at our MLA chapter meeting where I got tips and tricks. This is actually the poster that got me this gig, Spice Up Your Career by Publishing and Presenting. There was no way to get around this text because it just had a lot of text. This was a roundtable, results of the roundtable. So I used readable sections, I used bullets, I sprinkled icons throughout. I did my best. But yeah, so those are 3 of my examples. And then as Tracy mentioned in my intro, I have done a lot of posters. I call myself the poster queen. I love doing posters because they're little works of art to me. So I presented, 29 posters, and they're my thing. And when you say that a poster is a little work of art, that means that images rule. So one of the rules for posters is have lots of white space. Well, in this example, it's lots of green space. I think this poster is just beautiful, and it's all there. I love this concept. It's all text, but look at it. It is it's the text message poster. And I'm like, I might have to use that. Like, how fun is that? It's all there. It's great. It's eye-catching. It's so fun. And then this one is also great. I love this cat idea. I would say I would use way more bullets in that text area, and more bullets and way less text. They could have cut that down. So these are from the Better Posters Gallery and the Better Posters blog. Also notice that I split up all these posters because you're human, you're flesh and blood. You're going to read ahead. You're going to be distracted. So that's why I like to split up my slides like that. And breaking news, y'all! I just got this email last week from the Clinical Librarians and Evidence-Based Practice Caucus of the MLA. They're doing a how to design a poster, so we should all attend. It will be recorded. There's the Zoom link. I mean, I'm always interested in learning how to improve my design skills and hearing the tactics that other people take. So yes, let's do this. I'll see you there, hopefully. So presenting your poster, okay, yeah. Yes, it can be awkward. The good news is that your poster presentation will typically last only about an hour. So you're just standing there, trying to look at, find people who will be nice to you and talk to you. But they can also be so fun meeting new folks, networking, and finding similarly minded people who are interested in your research. There's other attention-grabbing ideas that you can use. You can use 3D. One time we did a poster on systematic reviews, and you know how systematic reviews, the search is pages long. We printed out the pages and we tacked them to the poster, and people could come by and lift up the paper and look at the systematic review. And yeah, we got some comments on how we could have done our search better, which is fine. We love that. I've seen people hang balloons by their poster, stick a cup of candy to the poster board. These can serve as icebreakers and attention getters. So yeah, it can be fun, but yeah, you are kind of like, will you be my friend for in between people? But it's okay. You get used to it. Now, conference funding. As I mentioned before, conferences are expensive. Oh my gosh. Now, if your institution is a nice one that likes to send people to conferences and pay for them if you're presenting, that's great. Some institutions prioritize people who are presenting, or maybe if you're in a leadership role, like chair of a committee or something, you get prioritized. But if not, we do have some options. If you still need funding, MLA and chapter grants are an option. Now, MLA has annual travel grants. Here's a screenshot from a few of them. But be prepared, have your CV ready, because they usually are going to want your CV in the application. They're going to want a statement of why you should be chosen to get the travel award. And sometimes these grants do prioritize presenters, but not always. And also, if you present the last, 2 or 3 years, MLA has given discounted registration. So we've been asking for that for a long time, and that's really nice. So I'm always presenting anyway, but I love the $75 off. That is really, it helps, you know. And then don't discount awards. This might seem extreme, but do you remember that some chapter awards will pay for your annual chapter meeting registration? For example, in the South Central chapter, our Library of the Year award, they'll pay for your next year's chapter annual meeting registration. So that helps too. Always, again, mind these deadlines. And if there's any other funding sources, please put them in the chat. These are the ones that I could think of. And then I also want to give a plug to the Network of the National Libraries of Medicine. They have that professional development award, at least in a couple of different formats. Here's the PDA. They might have one or two other ones. Keep in mind, these do not provide funding to attend the MLA annual meeting, usually not the chapter meeting either, but they are pretty open to other kinds of conferences or meetings that you could present at or attend or get knowledge from. So don't forget about these awards too. The National Network of Libraries of Medicine Awards are typically open throughout the year, but they do have due dates as well. So know that you're also going to have to follow their application instructions with your CV and all that as well. Okay, wrapping up. If you don't know the website Reductress, it is hilarious. I saw this meme. I was like, yeah, why do you even have imposter syndrome? Are you even who are you to have imposter syndrome? So imposter syndrome, it's also known as imposter phenomenon, imposterism, imposter fears. And it was coined in the 1970s, and it was really, it came out first addressing women. There were more and more women in the workforce at that time, but actually 70% of workers have at one time had imposter syndrome. So the definition is that it's an internal experience of intellectual phoniness. It is not a psychological syndrome found in the DSM at this time. So that's a good thing. But getting a little more into it. So imposter phenomenon, or whatever you want to call it, it usually consists of 3 core factors. Number 1, the belief that you fooled other people. Number 2, the fear that you're going to be exposed as a fraud. And number 3, the continuous tendency to downplay your achievements. Y'all, don't buy into that. There are some actual silver linings that come along with having imposter syndrome. And I have here an article from the Harvard Business Review. And what I want to say is that you can use it for good. It's not always as bad as it seems. Here are some names: Tom Hanks, Michelle Obama, Wolfgang Puck, Maya Angelou, Padma Lakshmi, and a little guy named Albert Einstein. They have all gone on record as saying that they had imposter syndrome. So the other good news is that the research shows if you have it, it doesn't affect your performance or outcomes. I personally don't have imposter syndrome. I have had it in the past when I was a classical musician in my youth. I had it really, really bad. I didn't feel like I belonged. I knew that they were going to kick me out of the orchestra at some point. And it made me actually work harder. And that's another benefit of imposter syndrome. It can make you work harder. And I remembered that even the last chair violinist in the New York Philharmonica is an absolute virtuoso master. So here's how we're going to use our imposter syndrome for good. Some of you have heard of the writer Adam Grant. He's a leading leader in business, and he has, I think his most recent book is called Think Again. He actually has 3 main benefits associated with imposter syndrome. Number 1, there is this motivation to work harder than anyone around you. And that's what happened to me when I was a little violist in the symphony at a prestigious high school. I worked so hard and I got first chair, and it proved, it proved that I belong there. Just be careful you don't get burnout, don't give 110%, that kind of thing. Be careful. It also means that if you don't think that the way you do things is the right way, you're more open to suggestions from other people around you. And so diversity always wins out, and openness always benefits all of us. And then the third one, I mean, you can't deny this great one, becoming a better learner. Some people with imposter syndrome think, well, I'm not smart enough. I lack learning. And a small dose of this self-doubt can have benefits. You might proactively seek out input and advice from others, and this broadens your experience and just makes you a better learner. So with that, yes, thank you from me and Tara, and we're gonna get into the Q&A portion, and I'm gonna stop sharing my slide here. Thank you for your time, and let's talk.
Yes, well, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for both of you for coming. I have been kind of tracking some of the questions, but continue to post them in the chat if you have any. So just kind of starting at the top, I think I have one for Tara. Have you had that conversation of equal authorship before, or do you get any pushback? This one is from Maddie. She said she's assuming that that's a conversation that happens before starting a research project with someone.
I have definitely had that conversation. I would say that in our group that collaborates, we have that conversation with every project like that at some point. Now, we don't necessarily have it at the very beginning because we don't always know exactly who's going to take the lead too. Because lots of different environmental factors determine that as well. I've never explicitly had any pushback about it. I can say that, there might have been times in the past there were people who maybe didn't like it, but didn't say anything, but I couldn't tell you for sure. But certainly in the group that I've been working with for years, it's just been kind of the way that we functioned. And it's one of our ways of making sure that everybody hopefully gets some credit for the work that they do. There are going to be people often who have to take a certain amount of lead on those projects. And so it is a negotiation. I think it has to be done respectfully, and I think it has to be done for the right reasons, because we also don't want to short people of their credit. Now more and more, maybe with some of this idea of being able to provide caveats in certain situations where, hey, everybody contributed the same thing to this, that might make it more helpful than, say, simply just alphabetizing, which is what, some people have done, or we have done, or all sorts of different ways to approach it, but that gives it a little bit more meaning, maybe, as far as why are we doing this? Why do we think it's important? But definitely a conversation I've had many times. To my perception, has usually gone fairly positive, but it does not necessarily in our group, again, take place at the very beginning. Things have to shape up a little bit more, I think, before we decide how we'd like it to go ahead and try and play out.
All right. And I've got another question for you, Tara. If you are not on a tenure track, is it worth worrying about impact factors of the journal you are submitting to?
So that's a really good question. I am not on tenure track, and I hope I am never on tenure track but at our university, increasingly, I would say, having looked at tenure track requirements in different colleges versus, non-tenure tracks, there is a chance that journal impact factor can be used to assess a researcher's productivity in either of those situations. And especially, for instance, I know that our university strategic plan is now placing very high emphasis on publishing in very high impact journals, even though, high impact journals, that number will vary greatly. What's a high impact journal in a very small niche field may not be a high impact journal at all in the bigger ones. And so it's very complicated. And so it really, I think, depends on your institution and what kind of context can you share about that? Because let's say the rule is absolutely you have to publish in, whatever high impact journals are, and that's the rules. How do you provide context along with your work that, hey, I published, this is the high impact journal in my field, it's a 3, but that's the highest, most prestigious journal in my field. how do you talk about alternatives to the journal impact factor, which is something that we didn't get to talk about much today. I had a metrics slide. It was for the best that I took it out. But, you know, you're only going to have a journal impact factor if you're indexed in the journal citation reports. So if you're not a journal that's indexed in JCR, does that mean, you know, you don't have an impact factor? Yes. If you don't have an impact factor, does that mean you're not quality and that's why you're not indexed in JCR? No, not necessarily at all. And there are all sorts of journal metrics now in addition to the journal impact factor, but of course that's the one that's the most embedded, I think, in academic culture at the moment. So how do we prepare ourselves as people who may not be publishing in giant journal impact factor, you know, journals appropriately so, that there are alternatives, you know, or to put yours in context, I think would be important. But it really will depend on your institution. I don't think the tenure, non-tenure is a safe bet. I mean, I do think it happens where there's some higher quote unquote expectations for tenure track faculty, but I don't think there's any set rule about it. It's just journal impact factor is what people know or think they know.
Thank you. Adela, I'll give one to you. Do you have any tips for overcoming that last minute imposter panic before presenting?
Yes, I do. Even though I personally don't have imposter syndrome, I did in the past. And my personal motto is train hard, fight easy. Training, when you practice, run through your presentation, know it. Muscle memory. Yeah, that's the best tip I can think of. And if anyone else wants to chime in the chat, I'd love to hear that. But obviously as a musician, you practice. And when it came time to perform, you kind of get in that zone.
Yes, good advice. Yes. Okay, let's see. Let's take a look at another one. This one was from earlier on in the presentation. I think when you were presenting, Tara, are we able to use any of the slides in LibGuides for presentations to students with appropriate credit?
I mean, for my slides, I'm totally fine with that. If you want to reach out to me, my email is on the slide set, and just let me know which ones you wanted to use. So, I mean, that's my off the cuff. I don't anticipate anything wrong with it for mine.
And Adela, in your research, did you happen to read anything about imposter syndrome and how it interacts with different cultural backgrounds? For instance, in the Hispanic culture, speaking about your accomplishments, especially as a woman, may come off as boastful. Was there any advice in that regard?
I didn't delve that deeply into the readings. I don't buy into that. I don't subscribe to that. I know about Hispanic culture, but I don't buy into it. And even when I was a young librarian, like I was trying to remember, have I ever had imposter syndrome as a librarian? I mean, I was a very young master's degree professional. I was 23 and I was in the medical world, and yeah, I mispronounced the word syncope over the phone, and that was really embarrassing. But I mean, I had a master's degree. Why am I going to downplay that? I mean, of course, I don't know everything. I'm a new librarian. I mean, who else goes, the first year or two on the job and is an expert? I mean, no. So I don't buy into that personally. So yeah, boastful. No, I don't. Women already don't boast enough. So that's where I'm at with that. But yeah, I'm sorry that, other people are affected by that, old timey stuff. But this is a modern workforce world, and I just don't buy into it.
Thank you. Let's see. Tara, when you spoke about article processing charges, the APCs, does that mean that each time someone downloads an author's article, the author has to pay a fee, or does the author pay like a one-time fee for unlimited downloads?
In my experience, and I know I preface a lot of this stuff with that, but I think it's important because it is limited compared to some. No, what happens is the author pays that fee, but before their article is even published. So it's a condition of publication. If you want us to publish your article, give us $4,000. And then, no, it's freely available to everybody, and there shouldn't be any further, God, I hope not further charges upon the author after that point. That's how I've seen them work for the most part. I would say for all part, actually, but I'm qualifying it because it is, as I was saying, it's so dynamic right now. Like I hesitate to go, no, because I can see something like that happening, but it has not been the norm in my experience so far.
Okay. And they also had a follow-up question about that. Do you recommend a particular scenario for first-time authors, gold or green access, or do you?
Well, I think that's a good question. It's a hard question, and the answer I'm going to give is one that's heard a lot here, that is difficult but true, which is it depends. Why are you publishing open access is maybe one of the first questions to answer. So are you publishing because you really want to make sure your work's out there for everybody, in the journal that you really want it to be out there in? Are you just publishing it because the NIH says you have to because you use their money? And so depending on the situations that you're in, or is there really, like on me, for my first article, there weren't really any restrictions on there. So I was able, the journal I wanted to publish it happened to also be gold open access, so immediate open access to everybody, but did not charge APCs. I'm sorry, y'all. I've got throat attack. And so I think it depends on the scenarios, and depends on the expectations of your funder and your institution and your goals with that work. I think Sherry is publishing, she is publishing her comments in the comments. So she's saying she thinks of it as a different business model for publishing, pay to publish, free to read, versus free to publish, pay to read. And so, I mean, the situation really does depend. There's no best way. I mean, I would say it was nice to publish in the journal I wanted to and not have to pay for it, but that was the best way for that situation, right? So you would want to shop around and evaluate, I think.
Thank you. Let's see. I got another one here. Adela, how do you find people who are taking submissions?
I'm not sure if that's conference
That was
submissions or journal submissions. For you know, I really get into this on my poster that I showed, the one that got me this gig, how to spice up your career by publishing and presenting. Hopefully you'll be able to see that poster because there's lots more information about how to find a journal that would fit your article, how to find collaborators who you might want to publish with, how to pay for some of these APC fees. Yeah, it's always tricky for me. Well, not always, but sometimes tricky for me. Well, where do I want to publish next? What journal do I want to publish in next? Because some library journals are super easy to publish in, and some library journals are more prestigious to publish in, but it's harder to have your manuscript accepted. And in terms of conferences, we probably all kind of have the same conferences that we go to, but also in our field, we have, we kind of get news about other types of conferences. Like I work at a cancer hospital and I see some, like the International Patient Education Conference, IPEC, like that could, I think some of the regions, the NNLM regions even present at those kinds of things. Public health conferences, I've presented at those on PubMed. There's adjacent type conferences and meetings that we'd probably be interested in. So I think just by virtue of me have been around in the medical library world for so long, over 25 years, I just sort of kind of have gotten familiar with these. But, going to conferences and meetings, either virtually or in person, I mean, you network and you meet so many more people and you hear things and you go to the vendors booths and you see other, it's all just about kind of getting out there. But yeah, on my poster, I do have 3 tools that you could try to use to plug in your journal article title or subjects. It'll say, oh, you should publish in this journal. That doesn't always work. But one other thing that I have on my poster is that the library publishing world is very friendly. And we all know each other. You can even put it on a listserv, like, hey, where should I publish this article? I mean, I've gotten co-authors just by going to one of the listservs and saying, hey, I'm going to publish on this. Anyone want to join me? And I got 4 people ready to sign up with me. So yeah, just a network. Ask your questions on listservs. Get out there.
Yeah, thank you. And someone else asked, how can we access your poster? Is that available? Oh, here's someone posted the link. Very good.
Yeah,
Very
it
good
is
for
on the
that.
slides. Hopefully you can zoom in and see it.
Yeah. And then I'll ask, we're almost out of time for questions. We have about 3 minutes left. So I'll ask a question for both of you to answer. So what would be your advice to new or early career librarians on determining what to present about?
I answer that in my slide, in my poster too. The first column is ideas to present on. And I even have things like, what were your annual goals at your workplace? What projects did you work on? Publish on that. Things that you've seen on listservs, things that you want to bring into the library world, a research question you've always wanted to answer. Yeah, my first column gets into that.
I mean, present on what you're interested in. I mean, maybe that's a selfish answer, but I think if you're presenting on something you're not interested in, nobody else is going to be interested in it either. And try and segue what you're interested in. Would other people be interested in it? So it's kind of like finding a research question as well. What about what you're interested in would be interesting or could help your colleagues on a professional level? And so that opens up, I think, things to a wide variety of topics that you can kind of tailor to your experience and your interests, as well as what you think could be shared with colleagues, because that is the point, of course, of publishing, but also of presenting at conferences and everything, is to share what you've discovered or are hoping to discover with other professionals. So, I mean, I think, again, maybe that's selfish. I think, start in a place that's not boring to you and go from there.
I mean, my publishing motto is sharing and caring. And as I say in my poster, just if you think another library has presented or published on what you're about to do, well, they haven't done it the way that your library does it or the way that you do it. I mean, y'all go to the grocery store. How many types of ketchup are on the bottle? On the shelves? Like, I mean, come on, there's room out there for us all to have our voice heard.
That I do agree with.
Yes, well, thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and a special thanks to both you, Tara and Adela, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for watching. This video was produced by the network of the National Library of Medicine. Select the circular channel icon to subscribe to our channel, or select a video thumbnail to watch another video from the channel.